What I would like to mention before we will start, that I accepted this invitation especially because I like the programs like this, especially for students. And I was in my country running with my think tank the Summer School of Economics for students younger than you. It was for secondary school students. And the program was very unique because it was the program for students and their teachers of economics. So we were having in the same class students and their teachers, and we were trying to teach economics in more funny way, students. And by that observation, the teachers were able to gain some knowledge to teach economics in more entertaining way, because one of the things in economics that is unfortunate, that it is taught not in optimum way, that teachers of economics, they start, or they want to impress probably students, and they start with the definitions of the GDP, the composition of gross domestic product, and they scare you with the demand and supply curve, etc., etc. Of course, everything what I mentioned is important in economics, but these are only instruments. Well, I believe that we need to approach to economics in different way, and it's like in the social sciences, you know. Sometimes in natural sciences, sometimes natural scientists are laughing at economics, and other social sciences saying, this is not the science, you know. It's more about the ideology or views or whatever. But when you look at the natural sciences, you can see the scientists, they say, in my research, I see that everything around us and us was created by God. And the other natural scientists, they say, it's all nature. So you have the different points of view also in the natural sciences. And these different points of view are very typical for economics. For example, myself, I consider to be Austrian. I'm from Slovakia, but neighboring country is Austria. And there is anybody who knows about the Austrian School of Economics? Everybody. Not everybody. So what do you think is different when it comes to Austrian School of Economics to, which is not mainstream economics, to the mainstream?
So, reading Friedrich Hayek's work, the road you further them, I think it mainly puts a lot of responsibility on the individual instead of on the country.
That's the major methodological difference. So while the mainstream economics, when you have the economics lectures at university, it's more about what I described, while Austrian School of Economics says, okay, well, these macroeconomic indicators like GDP, inflation, unemployment, whatever, of course they are important, but be careful, because they are averages and sometimes telling very misleading story. So what counts in economics is not studying the macroeconomic aggregates, but it is studying human behavior, what we humans are doing when we are making economic decisions. This is what matters. And there is also Hayek, of course, and I established the Hayek Foundation in Slovakia, for example. But the major, I believe, for those who are interested in this point of view is what? Friedman is the more recent, the most famous Chicago economist, but the foundational piece of work is Ludwig von Mises, and his book is called Human Action. Human Action. And it was written many, many years ago, but it is really representing the very modern today approach, saying, these social phenomena are so complex that you need to apply interdisciplinary approach. So that is why I am the Austrian by sort of persuasion. And I would like to maybe just mention a couple of quick things for you to know who is talking to you. So I started, my first job was very, very long time ago, unfortunately, as a young researcher in this Institute of Economics of the Slovak Academy of Sciences. That was the end of 1980s and the collapse of communism. And when the communism collapsed, I wanted to contribute to the acceleration of the Slovak economy, and I established the Hayek Foundation not only as the free market think tank, but also as the to-do tank. So every time we had the opportunity to implement these ideas, we did it. And the first time it was in the end of 90s when I became the chief of strategy at the Ministry of Economy and introduced the first reforms I will be talking about in my second lecture. And most of my time, professional time, I spent as someone who defended interests of Slovak employers, Slovak businesses, both in Slovakia and at European level, as the president of the Entrepreneurs Association of Slovakia. And as it was mentioned by Bob, after 2020, I was a little bit in politics. I was elected to the Slovak parliament and later became the vice minister of economy that was responsible for business environment. And what I would like to do with you is to give you, to share with you the story in our region of freedom and how it relates to growth and prosperity. Economic freedom, which is of course something what we all talking to you during these days consider to be very important. And in our case, it is the story of economic freedom that is the part of the broader story of the freedom. So I believe that it could be interesting for you to see or to hear the broader context of our history. And before going to that, we maybe start with actually what is Central and Eastern Europe. And it would be interesting for me to hear from some of you what comes to your mind as a first when you hear Central and Eastern Europe. Because my starting assumption, and maybe I am wrong, that you do not have Central and Eastern Europe every day as a part of your life. You do not have Central and Eastern Europe as a part of your news feed. So what is it, the first association coming to your mind? It can be person, it can be city, country, it can be food, whatever. So
I think Vienna is considered the heart of Europe. So
Vienna, I expected some of this association. We are very proud of having Vienna as have you ever been there?
I actually studied there for a semester.
Have you ever been to Bratislava?
Just an hour away.
Exactly, exactly. So Vienna is the first association, Central and Eastern Europe.
Traditional, like this is the first word that comes to my mind. Like it's more like traditional, more old.
Ah, old. Very good. Yes, old. Yes, yes. What is it?
Cheap.
Cheap.
Yeah.
Which?
Well, I obviously not Austria,
Cheap
but
in a good sense.
yeah, like a lot of things are cheap there.
I thought cheap.
No. Not
Cheap factory.
No, not cheap. Things are cheap there, you know.
I know,
Somebody's
I'm
really
cheap,
fun,
okay? And maybe the last one?
Jewish history.
Communism and Jewish history. Very good. That's a history we are not proud, of course. Yes. I come back to that in a minute. So, Central Europe. It's not easy to define the term. I'm always fascinated by corporate policies if you will be working in a big companies, you will see all kinds of very different groups that people call Central and Eastern Europe, completely different. So usually this set or this collection of countries, from the map you see it's not central, it's not eastern. It's more in the north and to the south and center, of course. So it is the countries in the Central Europe, which is the core, are four, which is the Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary. And then you have in the upper part of the map the former Baltic states. And in the southern part, it is the former Yugoslavia states. So looking at Central and Eastern Europe from point of view of geography, just give you a flavor how difficult it is. For example, there is in Slovakia, in the middle of Slovakia, there is a place, a village, that claims to be the geographical center of Europe. Not only Central and Eastern Europe, but Europe. The problem is that there are many other places like that claiming the same. Not in Slovakia, but for example in Hungary, in Poland. Well, Brussels is the capital, I mean administrative capital, but not in geographical sense, you know. It's not in the middle. Even some places in Lithuania or somewhere up and north are claiming that they are the center of Central and Eastern of Europe. But what we can agree on from geopolitical point of view, that Central and Eastern Europe are mostly considered former post-communist countries. They made a transition to market economy, and again, it gets difficult. Sometimes people talking about Central and Eastern Europe include the former Soviet Union countries, and sometimes not. So this is the all countries except the former Soviet Union. And what do all these countries have in common? Well, they have in common that after the collapse of communism, they needed to make 4 parallel, very important transitions in a relatively very short period of time. Historically, it's just several years, in 90s, yeah? So it was political transition from totalitarian communist regime to multi-party democracy. Then most of these countries were part of the federations that collapsed. So it is former Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, Slovakia, former Yugoslavia. So these countries needed to make a transition from federation to independent state. The third transition, of course, the economic transition from centrally planned economy to market economy. And there are all ones. The counting is not okay. But the bold, the final one, it should be fourth transition, is transition from state paternalism to individual responsibility in minds of people, which I believe is by far the most difficult transition, and unfortunately with the least success and least progress in not only former post-communist countries. You are nodding your head, so I believe that you have the same experience here, that people tend to have this paternalistic mindset that they like when someone takes care of them. When the government says, I will take care of you, which is the most scary sentence, basically, if the government says, I will take care of you. So these are the 4 transitions. And what I wanted to do with you is to go through the history of that region. And it's the history as it was perceived by 2 people I know the most. One of them is my grandfather, and the second one, myself. And my grandfather is a good person to talk about the history of 20th century, because he was not a politician, he was not a businessman, he was the farmer, he was the average citizen. And he was living in 1910 to 1990. So 80 years of the history of the 20th century. And I will tell you about my experience after 1990. So what I go through with you very quickly, and I helped you to visualize his life in 20th century by differentiating the colors. So the periods when he had a good time for good life are in blue color, and the periods of time when he had a hard time, times were difficult and terrible, are in a red color. Red color in Slovakia since communist time is the bad color. You know, every time there's something red, it's bad, 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 bad. So you see, without knowing any details, so that most of his time he spent in a terrible century, actually. Terrible century. When he was born in 1910, first 8 years of his life he spent in Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austro-Hungarian Empire is not authoritarian regime, was not, of course. But Slovaks were not having autonomy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There were Slovak leaders since mid of 19th century trying to get the autonomy, were not successful. So Slovakia, Slovak people were living as a part of a Hungarian part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he, as a child, went to the school when the language that was spoken there was Hungarian, while they were Slovaks and they were speaking Slovak at home. And so it was first 8 years of his life. And then in 1918, after the World War I, Austro-Hungarian Empire, as a result of the war, collapsed. There were new countries born, and one of them was democratic Czechoslovakia, which was again for Slovaks, for people like my grandfather, the best possible conditions for, you know, development of the nation, because number one, it was democratic. Number two, it was with the Czechs. That was the Slavic nation and very close to Slovaks. And actually, there was one little event that was interesting, that democratic Czechoslovakia was based on lie. That those founding fathers, when they were negotiating with the superpowers, they were making decisions which countries will exist or not. So they came to the superpowers saying, we want to establish Czechoslovakia. And they said, why Czechs and Slovaks? Looking at that territory, you have Germans there. And actually, the number of Germans population is higher than Slovaks. So why the nation number one, Czechs, want to establish the country with the nation number three in terms of numbers, with Slovaks? Why? Where are the Germans? So the founding fathers needed to invent the artificial concept of Czechoslovak nation, saying there are no Czechs, there are no Slovaks. We are all Czechoslovaks, and we together outnumber Germans. And that was why how the Czechoslovakia was established. And then it's coming this bad part of our history. Before World War II, the Slovakia, independent Slovakia, that was separated from Czech Republic, that was partially occupied by Germans, and Slovakia came to the existence as the satellite state of Nazi Germany. Then there were 3 years of, again, the Second Czechoslovak Republic, but it was after the war. That was not 3 years, that would be somebody enjoying again. And finally, the most of his time my grandfather spent in communist Czechoslovakia since 1948 until 1989. And it was only last 6 months of his life when the communism collapsed. He enjoyed the communism collapsing, and 6 months after that he passed away. So all in all, he lived 55 years in regimes that were not democratic, either totalitarian, Nazism, communism, or monarchy, and only 25 years of life in freedom and democracy. So really, I would call the generation of my grandfather the lost generation. When you look at then the next, maybe to see for you to understand how was it in Europe and how the borders were moved and changed, you see this map. There is this upper left, it's Austro-Hungarian Empire until 1918. Then Czechoslovakia, as you can see, it's not only Czech Republic and Slovakia, but also the part of the territory that is now part of Ukraine. That's this long nose on the right-hand side. But then before World War II, the only left part of the map, the white part of the map stayed. So because Germany occupied the territories of the Czech Republic, and some neighbors took part of the territory of Slovakia. So it was just like a little bit of operation made, and Slovakia and Czech Republic were making smaller. So you can see the difference on this next map with the green Czechoslovakia as democratic state, and then later on without the part that was in Ukraine. And my grandfather also experienced not changes of the territory, but the changes of the form of the state. So in 1948, when the communists came, we renamed our country to Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, consisting of Czech Socialist Republic and Slovak Socialist Republic. And it was formally done 20 years later in 1968. And when the communism collapsed, again the country was renamed to Czechoslovak Federative Republic. So it is, so many changes during one life of one average man, that he was living in 6, 7 different forms of states, even without moving from his village, because he was the farmer and he was not traveling, he was staying at his village. When you look at my experience, you can see, again, without knowing details, you can see that there were more positive events during my life. I start with the negative one. When I was 4-year-old boy, one of the first memories I have is the Russian tanks on the streets of our small village. That was the invasion of Russian armies in 1968. Anybody knowing why Russians invaded Czechoslovakia?
To prevent them from leaving the communist bloc, basically.
There were no intentions to leave the bloc, but there were intentions to reform socialism. And there was the reform movement that called, and by the way, it was led by Slovak politician Dubček, and they were calling for socialism with a human face. And the comrades in Moscow looking at, what, the socialism human face? We need to stop it as soon as possible. So they sent tanks to Czechoslovakia. They stopped the movement, and then the process of normalization in 70s started. So it is very interesting to have the experience of living not only in a free society, when nobody is afraid of expressing the views, but especially to have the experience from the totalitarian society when you can say something and it can have a consequence. So we were joking during communism that, of course, there is the freedom of speech even in socialism, but only once. You say something, and if it is wrong, you go to the prison. So, and the people, knowing that, went through the process that was called normalization. Normalization was, first of all, people from Communist Party coming to you and asking, what's your name?
Nave.
Nave. Nave, what's your view on Russian intervention? Do you agree with that or not?
It was what Russia made through
Exactly, exactly. You passed the test. This was happening, you know. There were the committees inviting the citizens and asking them what do they think about that. And they needed to say, I am okay with that. Otherwise, they had a hard time. Their family had a hard time. Their kids were not able to study at the schools, etc., etc. So that was the process of normalization. Fortunately, it took less than 20 years, and with the fall of Iron Curtain, so-called Velvet Revolution, you probably know the term, was going on in Czechoslovakia, and as a result of different views of Czechs and Slovaks on how the country should be managed, the two nations decided to dissolve the Czechoslovakia and to establish independent Czech Republic and independent Slovakia. Why do you think we were not shooting on each other? Why the process was peaceful? Are we better people than others? I don't think so, between Czechs and Slovaks.
Maybe because during the years, they were mixing, like they were getting married to each other.
That's one thing, yes, exactly. There were family ties, whatever. And what is the most important, there were no issues, you know, that there was no blood events in the history. So we were living together very peacefully. And as you could see from the presentation, the borders were there from ages. So it was clear, this is Czech Republic, this is Slovakia, this is the border. It was not the case for example, in Yugoslavia, and that was the reason why there was the fight. Not because we would be managing it in a better way. And I could talk about the dissolution, but just one very interesting issue. Czechoslovakia, one state, but having the property. How would you divide the property of Czechoslovakia into two independent states? Any idea? History? Part of that, saying by the midnight, December 31st, 1992, what is on the territory of Czech Republic will be the ownership of Czech Republic. What is on the territory of Slovakia will be the ownership of Slovakia. And there are also financial assets and liabilities. How to divide debt, for example. What is it?
Population size?
Exactly. You could be the minister at that time.
Maybe.
Exactly. That was the principle. So it was. We have Czechoslovakia was 15 million people at that time of the dissolution. 10 million Czechs, 5 million Slovaks. 2-to-1 ratio. And 2-to-1 ratio was used to divide all financial assets and liabilities. Very easy.
Two questions.
Go ahead.
What kind of reforms
did they try to do in '68? And why did they want to separate if they were living peacefully together?
In 1989.
Yes.
So why? What was the socialism with a human face? Socialism with a human face was saying maybe Communist Party doesn't need to have the monopoly. We are not the smartest people in the country, maybe. So we could open up a little bit the space to other political parties. That was, for communists in Moscow, that was a nightmare. So saying no. And of course, the country was trying to open up to foreign influences in terms of culture, in terms of economic. They started to allow people to travel, etc. So the system in communist countries were that everybody had the passport, but not all with the passport were allowed to travel. You needed to have the certificate that was issued and signed by Communist Party. That I want to travel to Germany. I was not able to travel without having the certificate of Communist Party saying, yeah, Oravec can travel to Germany, but must return. And so very few people were actually traveling. And the socialism with the human face was trying to change it. Why we should prevent people from traveling, Are we afraid that they are not coming back? So we need to probably think about ourselves so that we need to do something better, yeah? So that's the first question. Don't forget the question, but the second was 1989. Why the nations decided to separate? I will be talking in a minute about the things that were adopted as the reforms. And one of them was, for example, that the companies were privatized. Some of the industries lost their support. For example, the President Havel, who is very known as the representative of that period everywhere, he was saying, as a one-sided gesture, we will stop our armament industry because we are now a democratic country, we are not part of the communist bloc, we don't need to produce the arms. But most of the factories were in Slovakia. So it was considered as the very not wise measure that was disproportionately impacting Slovaks. And as a result, in Czech Republic, they had, in the first years of the transition, 2% unemployment. In Slovakia, 12% unemployment. So that was the foundation for these debates about the dissolution.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say something very similar about how the citizens not come and say in one country to another country, we want more money. How can we do it like equal? Yeah.
Money was very important issue because we were federation. We had the government, the capital was in Prague, all because they were state-owned companies. All state-owned companies, they had headquarters in Prague. So whatever you were doing in Slovakia and exporting in statistical office, it was signed to the headquarters. So on the paper, it looked like economic performance of Czechoslovakia is all about Czech part of the republic. Slovakia not contributing. And in fact, there were the subsidies going from federal government to Slovakia. And for many Czech economists, it was the reason saying, we need to stop the money pipeline from Prague to Bratislava. We need to separate. So it was not, I would say, even paradoxically, it was not Slovaks who were the driving force, because many people were afraid of being independent. It was Czechs, the more advanced part of Czechoslovakia, saying, you are a burden on our shoulders. We want to get rid of you. That was the true story of the dissolution.
But not with the fight. It everything
Not with the.
with the fight. Because
There
when
was no
you,
fight.
yeah, this is
There
I
was a
said-
debate.
Yeah, I said it because all happening in Israel and what we are have with the Palestinian, and it's very iron see stuff like that. Because
You
of-
will not see it because that experience is unique and it is not replicable. Because the historical, relations, history itself is different. So, especially in such difficult things like negotiation or relationship with the other nation, you cannot replicate it. It's not that easy. Unfortunately, if that would be the case, that would be happening in many, not only Israeli Palestinian, but many other nations as well. I believe that we were just lucky, to have situation. We were not smart. We were not better people. We were lucky to have that situation that allowed that peaceful dissolution of the country. But maybe, and it's on debate. We can in the evening debate it longer. The lesson from that part of history for you maybe is that to give the others responsibility is good for both. So it was, the people thought that Slovakia would go bankrupt in 3 months. It exists, and it was performing very well. So once and the Slovaks, the debate every time, a lot of months, was about blaming Prague, blaming Czechs, saying, we are not performing well, it is because of the Czechs. When we were separated, January 1st, 1993, no Czechs to blame, just us. That was, I know that there is this debate about the state solution or not state solution. I know that there are many other and more complicated dimensions in your case, but there is this element that you should be considering, that giving responsibility, you behave, it's your own responsibility, and do it. It's changing the whole game, believe me. So going through this history, then in the 90s, we have made some reforms. I will mention some of them later. And the quite success story of Slovakia was that it ended up as the member of the OECD, NATO, European Union, Schengen area, and adopted as the only country in the region adopted Euro.
Can you say what is
And Schengen, this is what I wanted to ask you. Anybody knowing what is Schengen?
Yes.
important?
Freedom of movement.
Freedom of movement. And you would not believe, how was it? Again, it's completely different if you are the citizen of Vladivostok under the Soviet Union. Any civilized neighbor is, years and years away. But living in Czechoslovakia, in Bratislava, when there was Iron Curtain, 10 minutes to walk from the center on the river of the Danube. So you were every day looking at the Austrian neighbor's side, and there was the curtain. You were not able to go there. It was prohibited to go, and actually quite a lot of people died trying to make it through this border. And then we entered the European Union. It was 2004. And in 2007, I remember that for the rest of my life, border disappeared December 21st. I was driving my car to the neighboring village in Austria. No control, no officers, no border. Exactly. So that was and I believe this is one of the most important things that are happening to post-communist countries. They became the part of the Schengen area. Schengen area is this, what is the color? It looks like blue dot. Oh, let's agree it's blue. So the blue part of the map, these are all countries of the Schengen area, meaning that I can go to any part of that Europe without showing the passport, without being controlled. It changed a little bit with the illegal immigration to Europe, and some countries started to reintroduce some controls. So when I go to Austria, for example, there is someone sitting there, but there are no queues. You are going, passing by, and just sitting there. Yeah. So it's a kind of not as it used to be, but it's still one of the major assets of EU enlargement. And finally, as I mentioned, euro. You see our neighbors, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania, not having the euro. Slovakia, because of the reforms we adopted in 90s, was the only country that made it into the euro area. And again, what I wanted to show you is the proportion of the enormous changes during the lifetime. For example, in my life, after 1990, I was using 3 currencies in circulation. Until 1992, it was Czechoslovak crown. 1992, 2009, it was Slovak crown. And since 2009, it is euro. And maybe we will be having again the Slovak crown if euro will not survive it. We will see. So if we are I want to summarize that. When you look at the experience of my grandfather, the most of the 20th century was not much about freedom, including economic freedom, because he was living most of his time under the communism. And you know what was the communism in economic area? It was 2 things, 2 words. Number 1, nationalization, and number 2, collectivization. And the founding pillar of the communist ideology was, we communists, Communist Party, will lead you to the economic paradise. But there are a couple of barriers we need to overcome. There are some enemies we need to remove. Who are the enemies? Intellectuals who are not supporting Marxian Leninist ideology. So we need to remove them. Owners of the factories, industrialists, capitalists, that is the class that need to be destroyed. We need to take the ownership from them, nationalize it. And communists were so perverse that they sometimes, can you imagine that? Let the owners of the companies they nationalized to continue to work in their companies as the average employees, as the blue-collar workers. Former owner of the company going to his company for the rest of his life as the employee. You can take the assets from capitalists, but you will not take these skills that are necessary to develop these capital assets. So what was the story? After the nationalization, most of the companies and their performance was going down because those driving forces, skills of capitalists, was not there, you know. The same with the collectivization. All my family were the farmers. And after 1948, with the nationalization, the communists said, we need to eliminate individual farmers. We will create the socialist cooperatives. And they forced all farmers to put their land to the socialist cooperatives. So they were generating the pressure until they signed that they agree to put their land to socialist cooperatives. So I told you that my grandfather was farmer, but the real farmer in our family was grandmother. And she was very stubborn. She, didn't want to sign. So she was telling me the stories. The communists put her to the van without the window and were driving her around for hours, telling her, if you will not sign, we will bring you to the Moscow, to some concentration camp. And by the way, she did not sign until 1960 something, when she became ill, and then she gave up. But this was the no economic freedom basically under the communism. But second part is more optimistic, end of 20th century and 21st century, when we have this transition with the deregulation, price liberalization, and privatization. And unfortunately, in 21st century, and it will be final part of my presentation, we are in a spiral partially coming back. And in the beginning of 90s, it started after the collapse of communism with the very important debate that was taking place under Czechoslovakia at that time. And there was a big debate saying, is our goal, we want to make it to reformed socialist system, or it is the market economy without socialist elements? Are we going to make it slowly, taking one measure, seeing what is the impact, evaluating it, taking another measure, or we are going it radically and quickly? What would you do? But you would be in a position in Israel saying, we are not happy with the state of the economy in Israel. Israel needs fundamental reforms, and you would be able to opt of these options. What would you opt?
In Israel or in
Israel.
In Israel, I would do it gradually.
Gradually. And what about that? First part?
Market economy.
Market economy gradually. Any other? Agreeing? So what we did, we had a group of reformed, very reform-oriented economists. Most of them were Czech economists. They were insisting on the quick, radical reform and transition, and on transiting to as clearly market economy as possible, without any adjectives. And that was the strategy for early 90s. And as I told you, there were other reforms they needed to be implemented. And in the middle of this debate about economic reforms, the country was separated. So we needed to take care about ourselves. And as I told you, in the beginning, there were very negative expectations. And it was like a fairy tale that Slovakia was considered to be ugly little duck of Central Europe. But it took us only 10 years, which is a relatively small period of time, to be the shining star of the reforms in the region. And what we have done, and I am talking about that because it was not specific only for our country. It is the more or less the pattern for most of the countries of the region. That in the first wave of reforms in the 90s, everybody, former post-communist country, each of them were busy by macroeconomic stabilization. They were privatizing basically everything, deregulating sensitive prices, and then acceleration efforts to international organization. When you say that you would take the gradual approach to market economy, I'm not sure about the structure of Israeli economy. Do you have state-owned companies? Yes. Do these state-owned companies have a significant share on the Israeli economy?
Yeah, there's a lot of governments. It used to be much more extreme, and now
Is it 10%?
no,
less. Less.
today it's less after the reform.
As a part of your strategy, would you keep these companies or would you privatize them? I would privatize everything.
Probably private.
Everything. And in our case,
לא, זה פשוט כל החברות הממשלתיות.
the specific situation of post-communist countries was that it was not only about the privatization, but it was also about returning the assets that were nationalized in the past back to the owners or to the next generation of owners, the sons or whatever. So it was called restitution. So we were privatizing, and where it was possible to identify the former owners, the assets were returned back to the former owners. And it was not easy process, you can imagine, because there were all kinds of former owners, including, for example, royal families from Austro-Hungarian Empire. So that was not easy process, but I believe that it's better to have the economy that is based on private sector than economy based on state-owned companies, because the politicians having very negative impact on performance of state-owned companies, while in Slovakia, for example, in the beginning of the process in 1990, the economy was almost 100% state-owned, 100%. It was not like Poland or former Yugoslavia or Hungary. There were some small elements of the private sector. Czechoslovak communists were very good pupils of Soviet communists. So Soviet communists said everything must be nationalized. They nationalized everything. And from 1990, when the economy was almost 100% state-owned, just 8 years later, we were 93% private sector-led economy. 93% in less than a decade. It's unbelievable. Do you know what was the way how you can do that in such a relatively period of time? Have you ever heard about voucher privatization?
Yeah. But the problem is that a lot of the
Voucher privatization has undeserved reputation of the biggest robbery of the 20th century. Biggest robbery. Do you know why?
because a lot of people didn't know the value.
Could you explain to others what is the voucher privatization?
So if I understood correctly, a lot of the people that worked in the factories also received certain shares for the factories themselves, and in essence, what happened? A lot of people got ownership of these companies, but they had no idea what they were worth.
That was another problem. We, as the economists, we needed to solve this problem. You have enormous amount of assets because they are state-owned. You have no idea what is their value, real market price. And you have, that's one part of the problem. And the second part of the problem is you have no money. So what you can do? So the government decided to introduce the voucher privatization program, issuing the vouchers, the same amount of vouchers to every single adult citizen. Same amount of vouchers. And they prepared the list of all companies, state-owned companies, transformed them to joint stock companies, it's up to you, citizens. You can choose where you exchange your voucher for the shares of that company. It can be the company where you are working, it can be whatever. What was the problem? No, problem was not, because in a relatively very short period of time, you privatized almost the whole economy. But what happened?
People came from communist countries, they didn't have no idea what was the value of the stuff that they were owning. So
If you
people
would
with a
be-
little bit of capital managed to buy all of these vouchers.
You would have no idea if you would be 10-time Nobel Prize winner for economics. Exactly. There was no way how you should assess the value of the company. It just showed up later on. And some of the companies are still there, and they are very good, performing well, existing until today. And some of them went to bankruptcy very early. So some people received a relatively interesting amount of money, and some people ended up just with the shares that had no value at all. So that's the reason why the people have a very negative assessment of the voucher privatization. But I believe that was a crucial process in successful transition of our country to the market economy. And the reforms that were later on as the second wave of reforms adopted, we will not spend time now, because I will be talking about them on Wednesday. And especially of all these reforms we adopted, I will mention business environment reform, flat tax reform, and pension reform. As I mentioned, Slovakia in 1993 was underdog of the region. It was a country that nobody believed had any future. 10 years later, it was called Detroit of Europe, because we attracted Volkswagen, Peugeot, Citroën, Kia Motors, and there are now 2 or 3 other car makers in Slovakia. We are the largest producer of the cars per capita in the world today, which is very bad news. It was very good news at that time, but it is very bad news today. Why?
Because not all the electric cars.
Because of the hard time of European producers of cars, especially European producers of the cars. Volkswagen, it's really making very serious mistakes in terms of electric cars. Peugeot Citroën, it's the French car maker. So we will see. There is a Volvo in Slovakia. It's a Chinese company today, but it used to be the Swedish company. So it can be something what will undermine the stability of Slovakia if the things will turn very ugly in car industry. We will see. But at that time, we were called Hong Kong of Europe. And with the membership in all these organizations, as I told you, we are now standard European country with all positives and with all negatives. And I will be speaking about them in a minute, I mean, especially these negatives. But let's have a look at the economic freedom. This is the latest. The problem with these all big indices is that they collect data, and it took them 2 years to publish it. So you have the most recent index, which is indexed with the data from 2022. It was different country then. But anyway, you can see that the Slovakia is scoring best in international trade. And there is no puzzle in that, because Slovakia is a very small country, 5 million population. Of course, having the many international companies, meaning that the companies are importing the components, producing for example, cars or televisions or whatever, and they exporting that. So it's 180% of the GDP in Slovakia, which is export and import combined. We are one of the very most open economies in the world. The lowest score we have for, in the size of government and legal, what is it? Legal. Yeah. No, legal system and it's property. It's meaning the protection of the private property. And of course, it's not the tragic, but it's the lowest of all these because we have a terrible, I could spend several lectures talking to you how legislative activity in Slovakia is terrible.
You know what's the average for the OECD countries?
Average of what?
Legal system.
Well, I would say it's close to 8.
Close to 8.
Close to 8.
Yeah, I also have another question.
Go ahead.
About
Should I return it back or not?
maybe one step even
Yes.
behind that. The
One step.
extreme reforms that were
I
made
need to
in
find
the
it.
90s and the 2000s.
I want it. Yeah.
Never mind. It's okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, maybe one head. The radical
I will
reforms.
try. I will try. Yes.
The radical reforms.
Is it?
I think so.
Or one more way?
It's okay. It's okay.
Let's forget about the slides. Okay.
So the radical reforms that were made in the 90s and the 2000s
Yes.
regarding the free market
Yes.
rules have they were made in a consensus on the parliament, or it's were
Well, in parliament, you needed to have majority for that. Of course, it was not the consensus among the, across the political spectrum. It was not the nationwide consensus, but it was a majority in the parliament. And I would say I will be talking about these lessons from reforms on Wednesday, but one of the lessons is that you need to, one of the beauty of the speed of the reform is that if you are quick, you will surprise the interest groups, because interest groups are usually behind any kind of distortions you want to eliminate. And if you take the gradual approach, who is the poor gradual? If you take a gradual approach and you think, okay, we will first debate it thoroughly, we will evaluate it, you will not get anywhere. Anywhere.
It wasn't me, but I also agree with
Okay. Okay.
Do you think the radical reform was good for Sri Lanka because it was post-Soviet and had to rid itself from all the horrors of communism and socialism? Because in Israel, overall, we have the reforms are more gradual, and it's good for Israel because we have a bunch of really good stuff.
Again, I'm not selling it as a universal recipe. I'm saying that in our case, I believe that was the crucial element was to adopt these reforms quickly, otherwise they would not be implemented.
Just like your grandfather showed, he was used to quick changes. Yeah.
Everybody in Slovakia is used to quick and historical changes, so if there would be nothing like that every week, we would feel that kind of boring world we are living in. Go ahead.
Well, I would like to hear from you. What do you think was the main impact of changing to the euro, as you were the only country in the area that made this change to its currency?
Very good question. I could speak about that very long, but being in one sentence saying no difference.
Really? Didn't it make you closer to Austria in a way?
I was taking part in one, even it was, I think, 20th anniversary of adoption. No, it was 15 years anniversary of the adoption of euro. And there were central bankers from Czech Republic, central bankers from Slovakia, because we are very, for economists, very good laboratory. Two countries, there used to be one country, one economy, and now having two different currencies. So central bankers analyzing in details performance of both economies. And you can say that, for example, the situation is that if you have some troubles in economy, then your currency is helping you to adjust to the shock, external shock, because you can devaluate your currency. Yeah? If you have central bank not in Bratislava but in Frankfurt, there is nothing like that happening. So that is the observation that those countries like Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic in 2009, when there was a financial crisis, they had more serious decline of the GDP, but they were taking off more quickly than us. So our depression was not that serious, but it was taking a longer time to get back. So it's one of the differences, but not many significant other effects that could be named. One, two. No, ladies first. Ladies first.
You talked about like the changes in culture because people were used to paternalism. So I wonder.
Number one issue, exactly.
Yeah. So I wonder because it's so hard to make decisions and people got used to like the government making decisions for them. And since you guys became a democracy, why wouldn't they choose someone who is like more strong leadership that like wants to decide everything?
It's back. It's back. People are dreaming of the strong leadership, and that is why I say that was the transformation that was not completed, and the people are still preferring leaders. They say, "Don't worry, dear citizens. Don't worry, dear voters. Don't pay any attention to what we do. We will take care of you." So we have, for example, the government, that is socialist government, and it is now there is this trend against the non-governmental organizations. And they say, if you want to even talk and discuss politics, please establish your own party, run in the elections, and you can discuss politics, not as an NGO. As an NGO, you can help hospitals, you can help homeless people, whatever. Don't talk about politics. So that is this tendency of we politicians take care of you.
How did you have all these like decades that you didn't have that?
Because I believe that's the most difficult of. You can change. I will be talking about that on Wednesday. The easiest reform to do is, for example, tax reform. You change the numbers in the tax law, and you have a change. You eliminate some taxes. You have the tax reform. But how to help citizens to demand less the intervention of the state and to think about his or her own responsibility, there is no quick solution to that. So I am in favor of the quick reforms, but I am aware that some areas are not possible to be reformed like that.
Yeah.
Second.
What are you guys doing about the declining birth rate in Slovakia, and how does it affect your probably the future of your economy?
Yes, declining birth rates are there. We are doing well. What I wanted to say nothing, but it's not the truth that nothing. There were the reforms to change the tax system and the social security system more in favor of taxpayers who are having children. Yeah. So, for example, you have significantly higher amount of tax deductible item if you have the kid. And at the same time, I'm not big in favor of that kind of reforms, because there were studies trying to analyze the impact of such kind of reforms. Doesn't work. You introduce that. It's nice to sell it to the population, saying, "Oh, we are having pro-family, measures supporting." fighting against this unfavorable demographic decline, etc. In practice, it has almost no impact. It is not increasing the birth rates. It is not motivating young people to have kids. It's not enough.
I was curious to hear from you, what is your opinion about the European Union? As somebody that comes from the
Coming back to that.
School of government,
I'm going to that.
it's very not pro-market.
I would
Right.
like to know more about the challenges.
Not provocative?
No, it's not pro-market, the European. It's got a lot of socialist elements. I worked in the European Bank.
Do we have time for that? I believe we have.
15
minutes, yeah.
I would want to hear more about the challenges that you have in the transition.
Yeah.
This is first. And second, what would you do differently?
Good. Challenges. What are the challenges during the transition and what we would do differently? Well, the challenges, of course, this you needed to win this debate first about how to reform the country. So that was the most challenge. The difficult challenge was in the beginning, because naturally most of the people and most of the economists were in favor of gradualism and in favor, because when the communism collapsed, nobody expected that, number one, it would collapse, and number two, when it collapsed, nobody thought that it will be the capitalism. Everybody thought that it will be socialism with a human face, number two, as it was in 1968. So that was, and I am personally glad that the small groups of radical-oriented economists, they were a minority, clear minority, but they won that debate. And finally, we went for that radical approach. And what we would do differently, well, it is part of that history after 1993, when the Czechoslovakia was dissolved. Czechs, they continued with the voucher privatization until the property was privatized. Slovakia wanted to show that we are not Czech Republic anymore. We will not do second or third round of voucher privatization. At that time, the government told, we will be building Slovak capital group of entrepreneurs, Slovak domestic capital. We will distribute the property not to citizens, but to entrepreneurs. And you can imagine how it turned ugly. It was distributed to the people that were not the best and most talented entrepreneurs. It was distributed to those who were most loyal to the government at that time. So it was full of corruption and everything. So this is what I would do differently. Okay, so I wanted to, before coming to the EU, I wanted to show you this comparison of economic freedom in Israel and in Slovak Republic. But you need to tell me. I was discussing it already with the economists here, lecturers. I didn't get the clear answer. When you look at Israel and Slovakia, Israel is even in a better position. It's 41. We are 45. And you are considered to be the mostly free country, our economy. It's the assessment. And but the difference is, almost negligible. You are 739. So it's exactly 0.05 is almost nothing, statistically not significant. And when you see the lines, we are almost identical for a very long period of time. But the last assessment, I was wondering why you are better than us. My expectations would be, we are better than you. And so, and look, did you find what is the major difference? By far the largest margin, the difference between us and you in this index is sound money. Can I believe that shekel is having higher rankings than euro? Is the shekel so good currency? No. Do you have no problem with inflation? Because it's part of the assessment.
Very low.
So I discuss it with the Bob, who will be giving a lecture on economic freedom tonight. So you can come back to that issue. It's a little bit puzzle for me. I need to.
Less monetary freedom because you're in the EU and using the euro. Yeah,
Maybe
we have much more control over our currency. You're dependent on Brussels and Germany to deflate your currency to move it over.
It's not that issue, I believe, but we need to debate it with the Bob Lawson. Anyway, when you look at the economic freedom in basically Europe, you can see that most of the countries of my region are in the same category, in the second quartile. And what I wanted to show, but he's not in the room, to the Bob, to compare us with the former Soviet Union countries. I picked up Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan as one of the stans, Asian parts of the Soviet Union. But what is maybe interesting to see is that by far the worst assessment of these post-Soviet countries, it's not Russia, but it's Ukraine. And Ukraine is it's 150th place of 163. So it's really performing badly in this index. Coming back to the comparison, and let me come back to, we have last 10 minutes, to the EU issue. So when we look at the comparison of level of economic freedom of these 10 EU countries that joined the European Union in 2004, and these are 8 post-communist countries and 2 small island nations, Malta and Cyprus. So these 10 countries, you can see in 1990, they were almost half of the economic free as compared to the rest of the EU. After 30 years, there is the same level of economic freedom. So that was, you can see that there was not only Slovakia, but all other post-communist countries were making these necessary steps as Slovakia did. And now the most important, why we are talking about economic freedom, it's not the goal per se. Why? What is it?
It's not prosperity.
Exactly, it's a prosperity. It's prosperity what is the goal. And now you can see how the countries were performing over the period of time 2004 when they entered the European Union and 2022. It's a little bit difficult. You need to concentrate what is on that chart. You see the countries and you see what was the GDP as compared to the EU average in the 2004 and after almost 20 years. And you can see from the different shapes, different performance of the countries. And unfortunately, my country doesn't look good on that chart. Why? Because when I was in power, we were introducing reforms. You see, that was the clear.
Everything was good when you were.
That was the clear path towards catching up with the rest of the Europe. We started as a Slovakia with the 59. In the middle of that period, which was maybe 2012 or something, we were 70. Yeah? But now, what followed was the mostly period of socialist governments, leftist governments, that were just enjoying good times and not continuing in reforms, and they were undermining existing reforms. And the result is that we are stagnating as one of the few countries, and that after 30 years of transition, we are at 70% of the EU average. 70%. Quite a disappointment, I would say. Because you have, for example, Lithuania, lower starting point, 50%. Now being at almost 90% of the level of the EU. So what is the lesson from this? Well, number one, the degree of economic freedom is, of course, as important as what we do with the economic freedom. And we had economic freedom, but we were not using enough, or we were not as smart as other post-communist countries. And this is the EU issue, that if you would see the development, or you saw that Slovakia from, I don't know, 6, increasing the economic freedom to 8, but staying at 8 for the rest of the period. And my assumption is that none of the other countries can improve significantly with the economic freedom without reform of the European Union. Why? Of course, the EU was a success story, as we mentioned. Most important success of the European Union is 80 years of peace. No war in Europe for 80 years. You are able to live and work and study everywhere within the European Union. Those countries having euro, no money exchange necessary, no border controls. But what is the unfortunate event in European Union is that it is declining in its importance. As a share of the GDP, when you take all the economies of the European Union today and calculate what was their share back in 1980, it was almost 30% of the world economy.
It's because of immigration, no?
No, it's not because of immigration. It's because of the two things. And now we are heading towards having less than 10% of the share. So we were 30%. We are going to be maybe 9% of the world economy. So we used to be the locomotive of the world economy. Everybody was listening what we were talking. We were trendsetters. Can you be the trendsetter with the 9% of the share? It's much more difficult, much more difficult. Okay. There are two reasons. Number one, it's not the immigration. The number one reason is that the other countries, other regions of the world are taking off. China is returning what was that 200 years ago. It was the major part of the world economy for ages. So it is just returning to where it was 200 years ago. So with the others taking off, we are relatively declining, but Europe is helping to that trend by shooting ourselves into our own knee. And these are these major sins I would name. All of them are associated with the European social model. Everybody in Europe is proud of European social model. It's very good to live in the society having a large social security system. But it is possible only if you have a high public spending, high tax and social security burden, high rate of redistribution, and high regulatory and administrative burden. All of that is bringing us down in terms of competitiveness.
Sorry? Was that graph before or after Brexit?
Which one?
The decline.
It was before and after, both. The Brexit is in the final part of it, you know. And in fact, I don't understand what is that sharp decline in 1992. I'm not sure.
Union maybe collapsed.
I was bored.
Ah, now we know. That's the reason. So what is important? For example, you need to understand what is the reality in European Union, that if you are the member of the European Union, one thing you need to do, okay? If you are, what you need to do when want to be a member, you need to adopt the acquis communautaire, the body of the EU legislation, enormous amount of regulation, and today it's EU in some areas making more decisions and more regulations adopting at EU level in Brussels than our own government, our own ministries. We need more entrepreneurship in Europe. That is the shameful Eurobarometer from many years ago, saying that the people they are selecting, what do? You prefer to be self-employed or employee? EU is, see, the minority of people preferring being the entrepreneur as opposed to be employee. Look at the China. It's much more entrepreneurial today than average European country. Let me see. Maybe the last final thing about the 1989, and I want to leave a little bit of optimism with you, because the communism in our country, in other countries, collapsed because of many reasons. Number one, because it was the system that was unsustainable. Number two, Ronald Reagan, military spending that eliminated any economic possibilities of Soviet Union. Number three, Solidarność, political movement of trade unions, paradoxically blue-collar workers that brought down the communism in Poland. But what is important? We were debating here what are the possibilities of individuals and voters. I am not sure if you had the previous lecture talking about the voter hiding behind the veil of ignorance. Not mentioned? That you as a voter you have one voice. So you have all incentives not to be interested in politics because you believe that one voice is nothing, it can change nothing. So rather ignore politics. But the message from 1989 was that one of the reasons why communism collapsed was that you are not only voting as a politician in the political system, you are voting as a part of the market mechanism. You are consumers. And the consumers in communism, before collapse of communism, were so frustrated. They were queuing. The result of central planning was that there was empty shelves, no products, no bread, no toilet paper, no basic stuff. And that is why the people thought on the other part, on the other side of the Danube River, they saw functioning economy with a lot of consumer products. And when there is always, that's the final slide, there is always the anniversary of the collapse of communism, there are some calculations comparing how long would it take to work, to earn enough money to buy some stuff before 1989 and today. And you can see that there are no foodstuff because that would be too long. But all foodstuff except bread, there is a minor difference, maybe milk, but all other products, consumer electronics, you can see you needed to work to get the freezer 40 days in 1989. Today it's 80 days. TV, 4 months, 10 days. Car, 27 months, 13 months. And the only difference is the housing. And the reason is that there was no price under the communism. Under the communism, flats were distributed almost free of charge. And then you paid some small amount of registration fee, which was the 5 days of your working time. So all in all, when you compare socialism and capitalism, the performance of the capitalism when it comes to consumer satisfaction is much, much more superior. And that was, I believe, one of the major reasons why communism in our countries collapsed. Thank you very much.